close your eyes and let the noise of today fall away. Tonight, we are going somewhere very old. A city built on 7 hills beside a slow brown river, almost 2,000 years ago. A city of marble and mud, of emperors and bakers, of grand temples and narrow crooked streets where the laundry hung so low between buildings that the sky nearly disappeared. Tonight we are going to Rome. Not the Rome of battles and conquest, though there was plenty of that, but the quieter Rome. The Rome of ordinary mornings. The Rome of a baker sweeping flour from his doorstep before dawn. The Rome of a mother waking her children in a small rented room on the 3rd floor of a wooden apartment building, listening to the creak of the floor above her, the murmur of the street below. Let your breathing slow. There is nowhere you need to be. There is nothing you need to remember. Just let the story carry you, the way a river carries a leaf, slowly, without effort, towards sleep. It is just before sunrise in the city of Rome, somewhere in the 2nd century of the Common Era. The sky over the Esquiline Hill is turning the color of a dove's wing, gray, then faintly rose. Somewhere below, a rooster crows and is answered by another and another, echoing across rooftops of red tile. There is no artificial light to keep them up long after dark. Oil lamps are expensive. Their light is dim and smoky, and candles are a luxury not every household can afford. So when the sun sets, most of the city quiets, and when the sun rises, most of the city stirs. In a modest apartment building, the Romans called these insulae, meaning islands, because they stood alone between streets like small islands in a sea of stone. A woman named, let's imagine, Fausta, is already awake. She lives with her husband and 2 children on the 3rd floor of a 6-story building. The building is made of brick and concrete on the lower floors, but timber and mud brick on the upper floors, where she lives. Cheaper materials, because the upper floors are the least desirable. They are farthest from the street's only water source, hardest to reach in a fire, and in summer, unbearably hot beneath the roof tiles. Fausta does not have running water in her apartment. Almost no one in Rome does, except the very wealthy, whose grand houses might be connected to the city's remarkable network of aqueducts. For everyone else, water is fetched each morning from a public fountain at the corner of the street. She takes a clay jug, wakes her eldest daughter to help carry a second one, and steps out into the stairwell. The stairs are dark, narrow, and steep. Roman apartment buildings were not built for comfort on the way down, only for as many floors as could be safely stacked. She passes a neighbor on the 2nd floor, an old man who sells roasted chestnuts near the Forum, already awake, already dressed, sitting outside his door with a cup of watered wine. Salve, she says. Good morning. Salve, he answers. And that is the whole conversation. Romans were not, on the whole, big talkers before their morning bread. Down in the street, the fountain is already busy. 3 other women are there, jugs balanced on hips or shoulders, waiting their turn, exchanging small pieces of news. Whose husband was seen drunk near the baths last night, whose daughter is soon to be married, whether the price of grain has gone up again. Fausta fills her 2 jugs. Together with her daughter, she carries them back up the 3 flights of stairs, water sloshing gently with each step. Some of it spilled onto the worn stone treads, as it has been spilled by countless other households for countless other mornings, for as long as this building has stood. Back in the apartment, one main room with a small sleeping alcove behind a curtain, her husband is already stirring the coals of last night's small charcoal brazier, trying to bring enough heat back to warm a bit of leftover porridge. Breakfast for most Romans was a simple thing, not the grand feast that later centuries might imagine when they picture Roman dining. That kind of feast, the reclining couches, the endless courses, the wine flowing until dawn, belonged to the wealthy, and even then, only on special occasions. For a family like Fausta's, breakfast, ientaculum in Latin, was bread. Sometimes bread dipped in wine, or bread with a bit of cheese. or bread with olives, if there were any left from the week before. Sometimes nothing more than bread and water. The children eat quickly, standing, because there are no real chairs to spare in a room this size. Only a single stool their father uses when he is home. Then the day begins to pull the family in different directions, as it does in every era, in every city, in every quiet corner of history. Let yourself rest here a moment. Picture the gray light growing warmer in that small window. Picture the smell of bread and wood smoke. Picture the sound of the city slowly waking below. Footsteps, cartwheels, distant voices. And let it become, for you, something like a lullaby. Let us stay a while longer in this small apartment before the day pulls everyone outside. Roman family life was built around a concept the Romans called the familia, but it meant something broader than our word family today. It did not only mean parents and children. It meant every person under the authority of the household's oldest living male, the paterfamilias. Grandparents, unmarried aunts, enslaved people, and sometimes even freed former slaves who remained loosely tied to the household. In law, the paterfamilias held enormous power. Technically, the power of life and death over everyone in his household. Though in daily practice, most households were far gentler and more ordinary than that harsh legal principle suggests. Most fathers were simply fathers. Tired, working, sometimes stern, sometimes soft, worrying about money and health and whether their children would do better than they had. Faustus' husband, let's call him Titus, is a fuller, a launderer of sorts. His trade involves cleaning and treating wool cloth, using a mixture that, to modern ears, sounds almost unbelievable. Stale urine, collected from public jars set out on street corners specifically for this purpose. The ammonia in it helps clean and whiten wool. It is not a pleasant trade to smell of, and Titus is used by now to a certain wrinkling of noses when strangers realize what he does for a living. But it is steady work in a city that always needs clean togas. Their 2 children, a girl of 9 and a boy of 6, will not go anywhere resembling a modern school today, though some Roman children did receive an education, depending entirely on their family's means. For a household like theirs, modest but not desperately poor, the daughter might learn some basic reading and counting from her mother, enough to help manage household accounts one day. The son might be sent, a few mornings a week, to a ludus, a small primary school, often held in a rented room or even under an awning in a public square, where a teacher called a literator taught reading, writing, and simple arithmetic to a cluster of children sitting on stools or the ground, reciting letters aloud in unison, over and over, the way children have recited their lessons in every century since. Discipline in these schools was strict, sometimes harshly so. A switch or strap was not an unusual sight. Education was valued, but rarely gentle. Wealthier families had different options entirely. A rich Roman child might have a private tutor at home, often a well-educated Greek slave, since Greek learning, literature, rhetoric, philosophy, was considered the height of sophistication among elite Romans. Some wealthy boys would go on in their teenage years to study rhetoric formally, learning to construct persuasive speeches, an essential skill for any young man hoping for a career in law, politics, or public life. Girls, even in wealthy households, rarely received this advanced education. Their schooling generally ended earlier, with the expectation that they would soon manage a household of their own, once married. And Roman girls were often married quite young, sometimes in their early teens, to husbands chosen by their fathers, often men considerably older than themselves. It is worth pausing on how different, and in some ways how similar, family affection could be across this distance of 2,000 years. Roman parents grieved deeply over lost children. Infant mortality was tragically common, and Roman tombstones, many of which survive today, are full of aching, tender inscriptions from parents to children who died far too young. To my sweetest daughter, who lived 3 years, 2 months, and 5 days, reads one such stone. The grief in those words has not aged a single day. At the same time, Roman households often included enslaved people, and this is a part of Roman life that cannot be softened or made comfortable in the retelling. Slavery was woven into the fabric of Roman society at every level, from the enormous slave-worked farming estates of the wealthy to the single household slave who might help a modest family like Fausta's with the heaviest daily chores. Some enslaved people, particularly those with valuable skills, a tutor, a physician, a skilled craftsman, could hope eventually for manumission, a legal freeing, and even Roman citizenship afterward. Many others lived and died in bondage. It is an uncomfortable truth sitting alongside all the ordinary warmth of Roman domestic life, and a fair history holds both truths together, rather than looking away from either. Let your thoughts settle now, gently, on something simpler, on the sound of a mother directing her children on a Tuesday morning that mattered to no one else in history, except the 4 people living it, on the small, unremarkable rhythms of a family getting on with an ordinary day, in a city that felt to them as permanent and unremarkable as your own city feels to you.
There is a rhythm to it all, chaotic to a modern ear perhaps, but with its own deep ancient order, the order of a city that has organized itself this way for centuries, and will go on organizing itself this way for centuries more, long after Fausta and Titus and their children have become nothing more than a few worn words on a forgotten gravestone. Let the sound of that ancient city grow soft now, distant, like a market heard from 3 streets away, fading gently towards silence. Section 4. Food, the baths, and daily comforts. Approximately 8 minutes. By early afternoon, the hardest work of the day is often behind a Roman household, and thoughts begin to turn toward food and rest and the particular Roman comfort of the baths. The main meal of the Roman day, cena, was traditionally eaten in the afternoon, not the evening as in many modern cultures. The Roman day was structured around daylight and heavy activity, work and eating all clustered into the hours when the sun made them possible. For a family like Fausta's, cena was a modest affair by the standards of the wealthy, but a genuine comfort nonetheless. Perhaps a porridge or stew of grains and vegetables called pulse, seasoned with whatever herbs were afforded. Bread again, and on a good week, a little salted fish or a few eggs. Meat was a luxury for most ordinary Romans, reserved for festivals or special occasions, rather than a daily expectation. Wealthier households, by contrast, might sit down, or rather recline, on couches arranged around a low table in the famous Roman dining style, to a meal with several courses, an appetizer course of eggs, olives, and shellfish, a main course that might include roasted meats, fish sauces, and elaborate dishes flavored with imported spices, and a final course of fruit and honeyed sweets. The wealthiest Roman feasts, described in surviving accounts, could stretch for hours, with entertainment between courses, musicians, poetry readings, sometimes even trained animals or acrobats for the most extravagant hosts. But whether the meal was grand or humble, one Roman comfort cut across nearly every level of society: the public baths.
The baths or thermae were far more than a place to get clean. They were, in a sense, Rome's great social equalizer. For the price of a very small entrance fee, often just a single small coin, virtually anyone, rich or poor, free or freed, could spend an afternoon moving through a sequence of heated rooms. The tepidarium, a warm room to acclimate the body; the caldarium, a hot room with steam and heated pools; and finally the frigidarium, a cold plunge pool said to close the pores and invigorate the body after the heat. Beyond the bathing itself, the baths were where Romans socialized, gossiped, exercised in an attached gymnasium called a palaestra. read in an attached library if the bath complex was grand enough to have one, and simply lingered in a way that modern life, with its schedules and its clocks, rarely allows itself to linger. Titus, most afternoons, stops at a modest public bath near his workshop for perhaps half an hour, enough time to wash the day's grime and smell from his hands and clothes, exchange a few words with men he has known for years, and hear whatever news is moving through the city that day. Fausta, meanwhile, might visit the baths on a different schedule. Many bath complexes set aside separate hours, or in grander establishments, entirely separate wings for men and women. There is something deeply human in this Roman devotion to the baths, the recognition, held by an entire civilization, that a body needs rest and warmth and cleanliness not as a luxury, but as a genuine daily necessity, deserving of real time and real attention, regardless of how much money a person had or didn't have. Let that warmth settle over you now. The particular heavy comfort of warm water and quiet conversation, of a body finally allowed to rest after a long day's labor, of steam rising gently in a stone room built for exactly this purpose, 2,000 years ago, for people not so very different from yourself.
Section 3, work, the forum, and the streets, approximately 9 minutes. By mid-morning, the streets of Rome are at their loudest. Rome, at its height, was home to roughly 1 million people, a scale of urban crowding the ancient world had rarely seen before and would not see again in Europe for well over 1,000 years. See, streets were narrow, often barely wide enough for 2 people to pass, lined with shops whose fronts opened directly onto the pavement. A baker here, a shoemaker there, a wine seller, a bronze worker, his hammer ringing steadily against metal. Wheeled traffic was, in fact, banned from the streets of central Rome during daylight hours by a law passed under Julius Caesar. The streets were simply too crowded and too narrow to safely fit carts alongside the crowds of pedestrians. This meant that deliveries, construction materials, and goods were mostly moved through the city at night, and anyone lying awake in an insula in the small hours might hear the rumble of cartwheels and the tired shouts of drivers on the cobblestones below. Titus makes his way toward the Fulonica, the laundry workshop where he works alongside several other fullers, treating and cleaning wool garments brought in by wealthier clients who could not be bothered to wash their own togas. It is physical work, treading cloth in shallow stone basins filled with water and that pungent cleaning mixture, wringing it, stretching it on frames to dry, brushing it to raise a clean nap. His hands by now are permanently a little rough, a little ready. Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, the Roman Forum hums with an entirely different kind of activity. The Forum was in many ways the beating heart of Roman public life. A long, open plaza surrounded by temples, law courts, government buildings, and the speaker's platform where politicians addressed the crowds. Here, a citizen might watch a court case in progress, its outcome shouted out to a gathered crowd. Here, moneylenders and merchants conducted business in the shade of grand colonnades. Here, political candidates canvassed for votes, their supporters wearing bright togas so they'd stand out in the crowd. The origin, in fact, of our word candidate from candida, meaning shining white, for the whitened togas Roman office seekers wore. Nearby, the great covered markets bustled with produce brought in daily from the countryside and from ports along the coast, grain from Egypt and North Africa, olive oil from Spain, wine from every corner of the Mediterranean, spices from as far away as India, carried by ship and cart along trade routes that stretched further than most Romans could imagine. For women of Fausta's social standing, public life was more limited than it was for men. Though far from absent, women could not vote or hold public office, but they moved through the streets and markets freely, ran shops, managed family businesses, sometimes formally in a husband's name, though the actual management was very often theirs, and among the wealthy wielded real influence behind the scenes in the marriages they arranged, the political alliances they quietly shaped, the households they ran like small kingdoms. Fausta herself spends her late morning at the market near the base of the Aventine Hill, buying vegetables, a bit of fish if the price is fair, and stopping to talk briefly with a woman she has known for years, whose husband works at the docks. Around them, the ordinary noise of a great city rises and falls. Vendors calling out prices, a group of boys chasing a hoop down an alley, a beggar near the temple steps, a cart driver's mule braying somewhere out of sight, the distant murmur of a crowd gathered to hear a public announcement read aloud in the forum. Since most ordinary Romans could not read, and official news was proclaimed by criers rather than printed for private reading. Section 5, Religion, Festivals, and the Rhythm of the Calendar, approximately 8 minutes. Roman life moved not only to the rhythm of the sun and the working day, but to the rhythm of the gods. Roman religion was, in its way, deeply practical, less concerned with personal belief in the modern sense, and more concerned with maintaining the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, a careful, correct relationship between the Roman people and the many gods believed to watch over every aspect of daily life. If the gods were properly honored, the reasoning went, they would continue to favor Rome. If neglected or offended, misfortune might follow. Nearly every household kept a small shrine called a lararium, honoring the lares, protective household spirits believed to watch over the family and its home. Fausta keeps hers on a small shelf near the hearth, a few simple clay figures, and a small offering of food set out on important days, a bit of bread or wine poured out in gratitude and hope. Beyond the household, Rome's public religious calendar was extraordinarily full. Roman almanacs from this era list well over 100 days each year set aside for religious festivals of one kind or another, far more than the number of working days most modern calendars devote to holidays. Some were solemn and formal, others were closer to genuine public celebration, with feasting, processions, and games. Among the most beloved was Saturnalia, held in mid-December, honoring Saturn, god of agriculture and time. For several days, ordinary Roman social order was, in a sense, gently turned upside down. Gambling, normally frowned upon, was openly permitted in the streets. Masters were known to serve meals to their own household slaves as a symbolic, temporary reversal of roles. Gifts were exchanged, and the whole city took on a loose, festive, almost carnival atmosphere that later centuries would echo in different forms in midwinter celebrations across much of the world. There were also the great public games, chariot races at the Circus Maximus, capable of holding 250,000 spectators at once, and gladiatorial contests at venues like the Colosseum once it was built. These events were, for ordinary Romans like Titus and Fausta, something between sport, spectacle, and civic ritual, a rare and thrilling break from the routines of daily labor, attended by every level of society at once. Emperors and laundry workers sitting, if not side by side, then at least under the same roof, watching the same events unfold. It's worth pausing gently here as this history moves toward its darker corners, to acknowledge, without lingering, that gladiatorial games involved real violence and real death, a form of public entertainment that later centuries would come to see very differently than the Romans themselves generally did. It was, to most Romans of this era, an ordinary and even admirable spectacle, tied to ideas of courage and Roman virtue that feel foreign, even troubling to modern sensibilities. Their history neither hides this discomfort nor lingers on it, simply lets it sit, honestly, alongside everything else. Away from the arena, though, most religious life was gentler and woven quietly into the ordinary texture of the year. A festival for the harvest, a festival for the household stores of grain, a festival marking the safe return of the year's ships from sea. Small human observances, marking small human hopes for enough food, for safety, for another year very much like the last one. Let your mind rest now on the quieter version of that religious life. A small clay figure on a kitchen shelf, a little wine poured out at evening, a family's quiet, hopeful gratitude for another ordinary day safely passed. Section 6, Evening Rest and the Turning Night, approximate 8 minutes. As the sun begins to lower over the hills of Rome, the city's rhythm begins, gently to change. The heat of the afternoon fades. Shop shutters begin to close along the narrower streets. The public baths grow quieter, their last visitors lingering over final conversations before wrapping themselves in cloaks against the evening air. Fausta and Titus make their way home through streets now softened by long golden light, the kind of light that falls the same way over every city, in every century, at the end of every ordinary day. Supper, if eaten at all beyond the earlier cena, is a small thing. Bread, perhaps a little cheese, whatever remains from the day's food. Not every Roman household could afford or needed 3 meals daily. 2 was often the more common pattern for ordinary families. The children are tired now, in the particular way children become tired after a full day of school, chores, and street games with the neighborhood's other children. Their mother banks the small household fire for the night, careful, as every Roman household had to be careful, because fire was the great and constant danger of a city built so densely from wood, wattle, and plaster. Room burned disastrously more than once across its long history, and every household understood without needing to be told twice the importance of a properly tended hearth before sleep. Outside, as true darkness settles over the city, Rome does not fully sleep. The ban on daytime cart traffic means the streets fill instead with the rumble of nighttime deliveries, the shouts of drivers navigating narrow lanes by torchlight, the occasional distant bark of a dog, the call of a night watchman somewhere in the dark. It is a different Rome after dark, quieter in some ways, stranger in others, a city half asleep and half wide awake, the way every great city has always been. Within the apartment, an oil lamp, if the family can spare the oil, casts a small, warm, flickering circle of light. Titus might mend a tool, or simply sit, tired, hands resting after a long day's work. Fausta settles the children onto their sleeping mats, perhaps humming something low and wordless, the kind of tune that needs no translation across 2,000 years, because every tired parent in every era has hummed some version of it to a drowsy child. And slowly the lamp is allowed to gutter out, and the small room settles into darkness, and 4 ordinary people who lived and worked and worried and loved each other in a city on 7 hills 20 centuries ago drift one by one into sleep, just as you, listening now, are perhaps drifting too. Tomorrow, Fausta will rise before dawn again and walk down 3 flights of stairs and fill 2 clay jugs at the corner fountain, and the whole quiet cycle will begin again, the way it always has, the way it always will, in cities built on rivers, under skies that have not changed in all the time since. Rome is sleeping now, and so perhaps are you.